Hey everybody, my name is Aaron Shane. Welcome to Habitat Now. It is my honor to have Dori Settles joining us from North Carolina. She will be down at our Glass Coast weekend and our Glass Art Fair this early February, which is creeping up real quick. And we're looking forward to seeing you all of you down there. So I'm going to take over your screen real quick. If I can remember where the screen share button is, there it is, and we'll go and talk about everything. There's so much to talk about, so much is going on, and it's an incredible time to be alive. So for those that you don't know, if you try to join these Zooms and can't find the link, if you click on this little button right here on our Habitat site, you click it, it'll get you to a Zoom button. You'll get the links every single week, just so you know. Top right, check it out. We still do these Zooms every single week. We are doing one next week for the upcoming Masterworks auction, so plan on checking that out. The auction is probably one of the best we've ever had. We'll talk about more of that later on in next week. The glass tour is pretty filled up. I fill it up for the tour this year, going through Europe on a cruise ship, going from port to port. We talk about this every week. It's an amazing event. It's a great experience. It's definitely worth it. So if you haven't done that, give it a try. And NGG is continuing. Our next talk is going to be probably February 10th after we get back from Glass Coast weekend, focusing on the art of the future, how the younger people are taking glass and pushing in the medium into their own styles, and what's going to be relevant in the future is relevant now. So I try to give everybody a glimpse with this show. Our Glass International, Glass 52, is being planned. It's going to be early May 1st through 5th. We're planning the Artist Gala again, which is a great experience to mingle and hang out with the artists at the Axiom Blowing Facility across the street. Ferd and Kathy are hosting Legendary Glass Party once again later on in the week, and we have a Masterworks auction. We're going to be visiting the Flint Institute of Arts. There's so much to it, so pencil those dates in. I'll send you the invitation soon. Our auction's up. I mentioned this earlier. We're doing a talk next week on the 27th. You can RSVP for that. I think the link went out maybe yesterday just to give people a preview of the auction. There's some great treasures in this auction. Probably one of the best we've ever done of works being sold from previous collections. So check it out or bid live in person down in Florida. So here's our Glass Coast weekend. It's hard to talk about now because it's sold out, which is always kind of interesting to have people want to come and say, hey, we have no more room for the VIP event, but you're more than welcome to come to our auction and to see the shows. The Glass Art Fair down there is how we market it to the locals. So I think it's a lot of fun to be able to go down there to this great area in Sarasota and talk about what's going on in the glass art world, as it's a mecca. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Artists coming in. Dori herself will be there, right, Dori? It's going to be good to see
Yes,
you.
absolutely.
Going to be
It'll be
fun.
nice to be in 60-degree weather too.
It will be nice for sure. We're out here in 14. I won't read everybody's names, but a lot of our friends and family are going to be down there from our glass family, and people who are down in Sarasota already. Laura Donover just said she's coming as of yesterday, which is great news. She's going to try to get down to see us. Michael Taylor, Tone Sand, and I mean, there's so many great people. John Kiley's going to be doing a demonstration for us. So this is kind of the marketing we're doing locally. The hours public are for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to see the Glass Art Fair show. The fireworks event is for it's really great. We're going to be promoting Richard and Barbara Bash's efforts to create and make Sarasota really a glass mecca of the area. And it was Richard's dream, and Barbara still pushes it every day by doing her docent tours at the Ringling College, and then she has a display up at the Sarasota Art Museum. We're gonna see their collection. If you've ever seen an impressive collection before, like hers, I don't think I have. I'm looking forward to seeing it. And it's a $10 donation that we're asking people that will cover the cost of the show. It goes right to the college, right to their scholarship fund. So it's something nice we're doing to involve the college because of the efforts that they've done in Richard and Barbara Bass investment. This is Rich. This is Barbara giving one of her docent tours when we were down there, and it was great to see. It was like Circles and Spheres was the name of her show. Had a chance to take a photo with her, which is very fun. So come on down and see us in Sarasota. Guggenberg Baldwin, our honored guests, are going to have a solo show. They'll work at the Sarasota Art Museum, the Imagine Museum, probably in the Ringling Museum. So it's going to be great to see. I think just Philip is coming though this year, and he'll be giving a talk. I could go on and on about each individual art show that's going to be on display, but I'll just briefly cover them. Optical illusion, fluid forms, crystal forest, and beyond the material. This is really the meat and the potatoes of the exhibition, of the space, of the weekend. The Glass Art Fair people are coming to see an incredible plethora of artists that are beyond talented, and we're honored to show their work at the show. Obviously, glass needs to be seen in person. You know what I'm talking about. And then the auction, John Kiley's doing a demonstration. He's never been to one of our shows down here before, and we're honored to have him do a demo. He's an amazing tactician and he makes beautiful things, and we're grateful to have him. And then if you haven't signed up for the Deanna Clayton glass class, she's doing a pate vert casting class down in Sarasota. I think one of the earlier days of the week. It's on the itinerary. But if you haven't done it, it's so much fun. She brings you to a table, you make your bowl, she takes it and fires it and sends it to you, the nominal cost. It's great. And I think we have about maybe 4 slots left. So make sure to contact Debbie to get those. We're going to Imagine Museum for the Fire and Light party they have, a gala, which is another breathtaking experience, exploring the museum's collection and getting a talk from usually the person behind the museum, Trish Duggan, as well as they're honoring somebody. I can't remember his name. He does the mirror glass. He'll come to me during the event. So it's something cool and amazing to see. That's it. That's all I got. So Glass Coast weekend's over. So I look forward to seeing you down at the Glass Art Fair in Sarasota. If you can make it, it's really impressive. We'll probably do a walk around. But that being said, Dori, thank you for joining me today. I'm so excited to learn about you and your work and your career and these shoes. And it's such a passion you've had that you've been working so hard to create these, and we discovered your work. So say hi to everybody real quick.
Hello from North Carolina, where it's about 9 degrees and blustery.
This is great. This is great. So I'll give you a chance to take over the screen. And
Alrighty.
Corey and my brother saw some of our work on social media, and we heard about it through some of our contemporaries, and we reached out immediately and said, this is going to be so much fun to share with people during the Glass Coast weekend. Is it available? We had no clue. And luckily she said, oh, well, I have as the show's coming down, I have a space. I would be willing to bring it and show it to you guys. We were so grateful, and I'm so looking forward to seeing these, because the technicality of creating a pate vert shoe is something that I don't think was humanly possible until Dori showed me today. So Dori, without further ado, please take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. And I really appreciate you and Corey reaching out. Initially, when I started this project, I wasn't actually planning on selling the shoes because I wanted them to travel and travel wide and far. And by the time you had reached out, I'd scheduled 5 more, I think 4 or 5 shows at that point in time. And they were all with galleries that had a requirement to sell. So when you reached out, I was like, I just have to say yes at this point. They are for sale. So what I thought I would start with was a little bit, wait, I'm in the wrong screen. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, quick keeping us waiting.
Because I'm like, all I'm hearing is dink, dink, dink. All righty. So a little bit about me and my background. This is my family, my husband, Jim, and my 2 wonderful adult children now. And the picture on the left was actually us in Maui zip lining, and we've enjoyed that a couple of times since. Not Maui, but zip lining. And then this past Christmas with our dog Bug there. And Jim is a blacksmith or hobby blacksmith, and that started about the same time that I started down the path of glass. Myself, I am a single child of single parents, which means that I was an only grandchild on both sides of my family, with no cousins and really no aunts or uncles, certainly not in first degree. There was farther away, but I didn't really grow up with any of them. So in that instance, I learned to entertain myself and enjoyed being by myself, which is great for being a studio artist. Later on in high school, I saw Children of a Lesser God, so that probably will, as a movie, so that may age me a little bit there for some of you. And I became very enthusiastic about sign language. I eventually became a certified sign language interpreter, finishing up my associate's degree that way. And then I worked on my bachelor's degree while working on the university campus as well as out in the community. After graduating with my bachelor's in communications and sign language, I actually decided it was time to put my feet up in a cubicle in what I'd call my pink fuzzy bunny slippers job. I wanted something that had benefits, that I had routine and everything, because as a community interpreter, that was definitely not something that I had. And I eventually I went to work for a local brokerage as technical support, which led to a promotion to becoming a software test engineer with them. That's an interesting background in itself, because when I tell people that, they say, how do you go from becoming a sign language interpreter to a test engineer? And my father actually worked in computers, so I've been on a computer since I was probably like 7. But there's a lot of the same type of thinking, and I like to carry that analysis into the studio as well. So although I think I take great notes, I realize afterwards I don't. But it's about analyzing what I know, what I don't know, and thinking, well, what if I do this? And synthesizing all of that information to get to that artistic vision that I have. So as I mentioned, I have the 2 children. After JD, my son, was born, my second one, I decided to stay home with them. And when they got up into school age, I pursued being creative. And I started out by crafting. I was very comfortable on a sewing machine, and I would make purses and other functional items. And I mentioned to my husband that I would really like to make my own beads and buttons. And I don't even remember for sure. I must, if it, what it was for glass, if it was something that he picked up on or something I said at that point in time. He had started his blacksmith journey, and it turns out the blacksmith that he went and visited down at the hot shops, his wife was a lamp worker. And so Jim signed me up for classes with lamp working, and that eventually became our date nights. Most Wednesdays we'd go down to the hot shops. I'd work with Kathy, and we'd be making beads and whatnot. And Jim and Elma would be at the forge. And then when they were done, they'd turn it off and we'd hang out. So in this picture on the left is one of my purses. I believe there's a bead on one of the flowers. On the right, this is Hot Shops is a creative area down in Omaha, with roughly 50 studios, 100 to, at any given time, 100 to 150 working artists. And there were fiber artists there who drew my attention, and eventually I joined them in their studio. So I was learning to move from craft into art because of what they were doing. The elephant, Africa, the tusks and the eyes are glass that I had done at the lamp, at the torch. And the fabric is dyed in the background and sewn. And I continued that journey, making some fun items, as well as the piece on the right is inspired by our botanical gardens, one of the waterfalls there. And that was actually the first piece that traveled with the Studio Art Quilt Association for a show, and made it into a collector's gallery. And then there was a companion piece, which I don't show, but it was mentioned in the literature about me, my Bioluminescent Forest, which was collected by one of the libraries in southeast Nebraska. Shortly after my time down at Hot Shops, I got the idea to open up my own art space. And I called it a fine craft and art gallery. So rather than calling it fine art, I was more emphasizing on the fine craft. The gallery area was about 900 square feet with a 1,200 square foot room that we used as a studio. And the best part about it was meeting all of the different artists and learning about all of the different mediums and techniques that they worked in. We offered classes, and occasionally I would need to pick up a class if an instructor wasn't available and teach it. So I learned a lot about different mediums and working in them myself. Also, while there, I took on an installation project at one of our local outdoor malls, and still working in the fiber arts here. The concept was to take an existing sculpture that was done by one of the wonderful metalsmiths in Omaha, and for wintertime to cover it up with something. And it was left up to us as to what to decide. So I pulled my friends in together, and we went with an under the sea theme. And it was bitter cold, like it's been these last couple of weeks when we installed it. That might have been one of those times in Nebraska where it was like, it felt like -40, and we were out there on ladders trying to get those pieces up there. The following year, then they asked us to come back and do something else. We pulled in a high school student who interned with us to create Draelim, the dragon that you see there, and then the whole theme was that Draylen was the king, and so there are other characters in that mix. Continuing on with my fiber arts, the Surface Design Association, our local membership, put on a show down in the Hot Shops Gallery, and rather than throw in one of my finished pieces, I decided to make it an interactive piece because I was really enjoying this public interaction. And so my husband and I put together a PVC loom, and I went down there and ran all of the warp on it. And then all of the pieces that you see going across, I started a couple of them just to help people get the idea. But that was all from recycled fabric and yarns that, you know, came from estate sales and whatnot like that. And then I had tying in the glass, I was working with a lot of glass bottles. And so I had fused down glass rings. And so people were attaching rings onto there. And that piece went on to 2 more gallery spaces on display with all of those pieces that people could interact with after that show came down. And I enjoy painting too. And so our local equine therapy nonprofit reached out and said, hey, would you paint us a selfie wall? So that's Stormy's quarters on the bottom right. And around that same time, the Girl Scouts, who I'd been working with for their art project and big, huge fundraiser that they do in Nebraska, reached out and said, we have a Girl Scout who is working on her gold project, and she's looking for an artist to collaborate with. And so Kaylee and I got together, and she said she wanted to do a mural in a corner at one of the local food banks, and so that it's the children's area, so it needed to be, you know, friendly and everything. And we talked about ideas, and she liked the under the sea themes. We went down to see the spot because I was thinking, oh, I'm going to need to rent a projector and all this, and it turned out it was a cubicle. So again, tying in my fiber art background, I said, I have an idea. We can hang the murals onto the cubicle walls. And so we used, she put a note out on Nextdoor, maybe her mom on Facebook, looking for old paint that people were getting rid of. And they hauled all this old paint over to us, probably like 50 gallons worth. And I suggested, you know, that we use drop cloths as the base. And so she was able to secure drop cloths from Lowe's or Home Depot. And I put the images up on there, and then she and her friends came over for a weekend, and we just painted a way to cover both sides of this 10 by 10 cubicle. So you can kind of, peering through the window there, you can see that that's the one side of the inside there. So my introduction to glass casting happened while I was still running the Smiling Turtle. Our local glass shop, Rainbow Artistic Glass, was bringing in Lisa Becker, who is known for casting glass baby dresses and other small child clothes. And my fiber arts background, I was like, this is absolutely perfect. I'm already enamored by glass. You know, I had caught the bug with lamp working, had done a little bit of fusing with a couple of the instructors that had come into the Smiling Turtle. And so this was really an opportunity for me now to marry the fiber to the glass. And for me, this may sound odd, but I really feel like this goes back to my sign language background. I did work with a deaf-blind man, so perhaps that's why, but it's all about the texture. What I love about working in fibers is feeling all of the patterns under my fingers as they run underneath the sewing machine, and touching the different kinds of, you know, whether it's cotton or silk or velvet, things like that. And so, but as a fiber artist, I'm not necessarily going to invite people to touch my work because the oils from our hands are going to eventually dirty it, or of course, you know, there might be food or whatever else that's on somebody's hands that's going to mar up the work. But glass, you can wash. You can throw some water on it or hit it with some Windex. And so to me, this was perfect. So this is the piece that I made in that class. That's why there's a smiling turtle, because I was still at the turtle there. And then I asked Jim to make me a stand for it, and so he made the little kid there, Toodles, to hold the glass piece for it. From there, of course, my mind is like, oh, I can make glass quilts and, you know, whatever else out of, you know, that I would normally be doing in fabric. And I would say I don't consider myself good at drawing, but I can draw really well on a sewing machine. So I would make quilts on a sewing machine to create objects, you know, like horses and things like that, that I wanted to create in glass. This particular piece, though, I reached out to one of my friends who loves making crazy quilts. And I said, would you make a crazy quilt for me, you know, in kind of, you know, small, you know, lap size. So this is about 12 by 12. And it can be ugly. What I'm interested in is the textures, you know. And so she did this on one of her travels. She would make crazy quilts in the car. And so actually I loved her color scheme that she had chosen. And so I translated that into glass when I made the piece. And the very first piece for Jan's quilt, I gave to Jan as a thank you for making it. And I was able to use that mold, I think 4 more times. I was able to cast, and I did them in different colors. I have one that I had embedded some copper mesh into, and then Jim's made all of my stands for those. I continued down this path for quite some time, actually, a couple of years of working with sewing and creating it in glass. This particular piece I made for a Girl Scout auction. So that's where cookie time comes in. The background imagery, which is not very visible in this picture, actually has a lot of timestamps to it and clocks. And I decided what I really wanted to do, though, is I wanted to marry the glass and the fabric together. So the center has been cut out and seamed up nicely so that it doesn't fray. And then that cutout piece, I actually created a mold of and then cast it in glass. And so the big piece, the square on the left, is actually a close-up of that glass. So that fiber wrapped bead that I made that you see in the center is actually glass there and matches other fiber beads that are there. And then because glass loves light, Jim helped me fashion a way for us to actually frame this out and be able to hold the glass as well as to hold some lights behind it. So it gets plugged in with Christmas lights behind there. So the next venture for me was to jump into lost wax casting. I was fortunate enough to see an ad for out in Phoenix at Milkweed that Mark, and I'm probably going to say his name wrong, Abelgard, was teaching. And I reached out to Mark, and at this point in time, I'm still working on being recycling, trying to be as eco-conscious as I can, which is not easy with glass. So I asked him, I said, you know, does your process lend itself to recycling? And he said, absolutely, we use clay and blah, 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 blah. So I signed up for the class. It was a phenomenal class and really enjoyed learning how Mark thinks. And one of those things is that he thinks in reverse, which we'll come to a little bit here. So I took the knowledge I gained from that class, working with the clay and then pouring the wax and then burning the wax out, and started casting some Zen rock gardens. And one of the things with this technique is using objects you can find everywhere, every day. You know, it could be from the kitchen, it could be outside, and using those to create the marks within the clay. So in this case, like I use crystals and rocks to actually form those crystals and rocks that are in there before I made the mold. And this is a version that is using shells, was the primary theme here. And this is all recycled glass. And the glass has recycled float glass. It's been stacked on its side, which creates those waves that are going across it. This is a crystal nest. I'm still on my theme with crystals here, but I really wanted the idea of making a nest, and I made a couple of different nests. And then thinking in reverse. So I went big. One of our local art galleries was expanding and literally busting out their wall. I am a believer that we can control a great deal in the kiln, but every so often things don't go as planned, and they almost always work out the way they're supposed to. So this piece, on the left-hand side, you're looking at the clay. So in reverse, I have to think, okay, the letters are going the opposite direction, and this is where this is going to be and everything. And it was a westward expansion. When it came, and this is about, I'm going to say roughly, I didn't have the sizes marked down in my inventory sheet. I think it's about 20 inches tall, to give you an idea, but it was 14 pounds of glass. So I do know that I remembered that very heartily. And when it came out, the mold had actually cracked right across there. And because they were busting through their walls to expand the gallery, I felt like this was the kiln saying, this is exactly what needed to happen. And I absolutely love the crack that runs in there with the flashing going through. After that, one of my friends said, hey, I really want to go learn this process with Evelyn Gottschall Baker. Would you come with me? She's out in Denver. So we went out to Denver, and I initially, the glass clay was actually not something that I was as into, but boy, the leaves really drew my attention. And in our Nebraska garden, I had seen early on, when we moved there, an ad for the Royal Paulina or Empress tree. And the ad showed this big tree that grows like 50 foot a year and has beautiful purple blooms. What it didn't say is that it doesn't do that in Nebraska. It not whatsoever, and it won't do it in Montana either. In Nebraska, it grows fast. It starts growing like in mid-June, and by the end of summertime, it is as tall as the house. It doesn't flower whatsoever. It dies down, and then it gets wider, and it keeps getting a little bit wider. So it's like a bush that gets really tall really fast and slowly gets wider. Because it doesn't flower, though, the leaves get huge. And so this would be one of the biggest leaves I was able to pull off of the tree, roughly 24 inches. And I cast it, which trying to flip over. So when you cast a leaf, you're basically pouring the plaster over top of the leaf. And so in order to remove the leaf and fill it with glass, I need to flip it over. And to do a 2 foot by 2 foot mold and get it flipped over is quite the challenge. But I did it not once, but 2 more times. So, and those guys are actually slightly smaller. They're, I think, 21 inches instead of 24. But I love the patterns and the veins, and you don't see, I mean, unless you're really sitting there staring at a leaf, you just don't notice all of this incredible detail and patterns that are in leaves. I use leaves all the time, and I use them as a part of my color studies now. But they are also one of my studio staples. They're ornaments. I also frame them in acrylic frames so that the light can be seen through them, and everything. And then on the bottom is the clasp piece that we did with the glass clay, the lily. Definitely an amazing technique. And for those of you familiar with Evelyn's work, you know where she's taken this. I've incorporated it in my own way. So now that I've been introduced to glass clay, now that I've been introduced to these beautiful leaves, I'm thinking, I absolutely love Alicia Lome's work. And I love everything about its look. I hadn't seen it in person, so I didn't know what it felt like, but I could kind of imagine based on the leaves. And and her design is absolutely amazing too. So I signed up and took her class, and this would have been right before COVID hit, maybe about a year before COVID hit. And going back to my gems and crystals, I was like, oh, geodes are great. And so geodes became, one of the things I love about them is that they're small. I make them small, they're handheld. It was something I could teach the Girl Scouts, and the Girl Scouts took these geodes in so many new directions. I worked with one group. I didn't even think to include this picture. That they were high school Girl Scouts and taught them how to do the geodes. And part of the project that we do is they get to keep something and then collaborate on something together. And they decided to make mini geodes and create a waterfall piece by using a rainbow of colors of these little mini geodes, which I had never mentioned to them. But in the back of my mind, I always thought it'd be really cool to do a piece that had a whole bunch of little geodes on it. And lo and behold, they come up with it. I'm like, wow, this is like total kismet. I just absolutely loved it. Still make geodes today. They're, again, a little bit of color study because I can see the leaves tell me how the colors layer with the powders, and they're very, very thin. Most of the leaves are probably at best 1.5 millimeters thick, where the geodes and other Pâte de Verre pieces are thicker. And so how you layer those colors on the outside is also affected by the colors that are on the inside. And so they're very informative to me to work with. I continued in different ways. This is trying my hand with lost wax casting with Pâte de Verre. And this piece is actually, he glows beautifully in the window. He's made up of probably 50-50 new blue glass with old ornaments that I had blown for a Christmas show. And well, these were the leftover ones, and so I smashed them up and used them differently. And then Jim made the stand for that. At this point in time now, Jim's starting to get creative. I show him a piece and he comes up with the stand rather than me directing him with what stand to make. A couple more Pâte de Verre pieces that I made. The left one was during COVID, and I was thinking about the people who are stuck in the big cities in their apartments, and you know what the sunrises and sunsets must look like outside their windows. And during this time, I was also raising monarch butterflies in our garden, and so I did a close-up study because I wanted to see, could I paint on my Pâte de Verre piece? And this is actually a round vessel, like a small cup. And then I'm another one, and I haven't gone back to it, but I'm enamored with black and red. And this is another piece that came out as a kiln accident. It was a solid bowl. However, the shape of my mold at the bottom was curved so that the air got trapped underneath, and I didn't realize it. And so that whole part actually never heated up fully. So when I went to clean it out, the middle just kept grinding away and grinding away. And I wasn't using a mechanical, I was just by hand cleaning it out. But again, I just think it really makes the piece having that hole, which mirrors the holes that I purposely left open on the sides where you can see the red glowing through the black. And Jim made this simple stand for me too. So COVID comes around and I signed up for a 12-week, so it was a 12-week painting class. The instructor actually was teaching with acrylics. It was about building up layers and scratching away layers and, you know, putting down things and then, you know, replacing them and just until you finally get to an end piece and kind of working fast. And I thought, why not do it in glass? So I laid out a whole bunch of cut up squares on my bench and got my enamels out, and I would paint a layer and fire and paint another layer and fire and paint another layer. And at the same time, I had well, the pieces behind me come from my Before We're Gone series that was mostly in acrylics. And so I continued that series in now the next year, but in glass. And so most of these have between 5 and 7 layers and firings in them. They're all on float glass, recycled, that came from a salvage. And the very last layer of enamel that I apply, I fire it at a lower temperature to allow it to retain the texture of what I've applied. So, and you can't tell him, his nose is actually perfectly smooth and a little it bumped out, but in the trees there, you can see the bark is etched in. Or like in the cactus here, I have the side shot where you can see the texture. Again, it's running my fingers across it. It just feels amazing. And I'm very sensitive to that when I'm cleaning up my glass, that I try really hard to make sure there aren't any parts that are going to grab somebody in a way that, you know, it might certainly cut them, but even just hurt. You know. So you were asking about my studio and moving to North Carolina. And so during this time, I've been waking up, Jim's already at work, and my friend Sari, who's on the call today, she sends me a message on Facebook, hey, check out this studio. And it's Rick and Val Beck's studio here in Western North Carolina. And this listing includes a video, and their house, I mean, they'd been, you know, working here for 30 years in the Penland area. Their house is in the video even loaded with all of the wonderful collection of art that they've bought, traded, collaborated on, you know, from artists who've been here and gone or still in the area. And then there's this studio, which is absolutely magnificent. Back in Nebraska, our studio was a 2,100 square foot pole barn, mostly storage, probably a third storage to a third to almost half storage. And then about a third or slightly more than a third was the blacksmith side. And then I had a room that was maybe 10 by 12, 10 by 15 where I worked on the glass. And then I had an upstairs room that was about the same size where I had all of my fiber art. So I went from a very small space, Jim went from a large space, to Rick and Val's place that they built while they were here, which is about 2,800 square feet. And just, I mean, the second half of it, when they built that, they made these huge, huge ceilings and covered in windows, which is absolutely wonderful. Any artist's dream, wouldn't matter what medium you're in, to be able to work in that kind of light. So this is kind of what I consider my dirty workspace. This is where I'm doing all of my casting. I don't really care about the dust. I do actually, I'm pretty good about keeping my place clean, but I don't have to worry about this traveling into like the finished pieces and other areas of the studio. A good chunk of my work is out of this small 16-inch square kiln that you see there on the left. And that's my favorite kiln. If I could figure out how to fire bigger pieces and have multiples of those just like sitting next to each other, I would. So all of the soles go through this kiln, almost all of the leaves go through this kiln. And then whenever I'm doing kind of samples or anything that's smaller than a 16-inch, then that goes in that kiln. The white kiln on the right-hand side is more of my production kiln. It's about 13, 14 inches deep and 26 inches wide. And that's where all of the shoes, when I'm doing the uppers, they go in there. When I put the shoes together, they go in there. And then the two kilns you see on the right-hand side there, those are the casting kilns that Rick did not take to Hawaii and left behind for me. The one in the corner, our friend Gary Beecham, who some of you may know, be familiar with Gary's work. Gary has been wonderful in helping me settle in, and his knowledge in glass is amazing too. He came over and taught me how to stretch the elements, and so we put new elements into the kilns. It took a step stool and then some for my 5'3" body to get into that kiln, and you know, I made sure that the lid was not coming down on me. And the kiln off on the right-hand side there is short enough that I didn't need the step stool to get into, but it is about not quite 4 foot wide and maybe 40 inches deep. So it's so they're both huge. They take an awful lot of heat to get going. And so I really, other than testing, I haven't used them yet, but I do have some ideas of where I may go with those kilns. And then the other section of the studio is where I consider more of a clean workspace. Although right now, because it's been so cold, this is the warmer side. And so I've been doing my best to work as cleanly as possible there. And then Jim's got this relatively, I mean, it's still a good size space, but compared to what he's used to, it's a pretty dinky space for his area. It's where Rick used to blow glass. It's now set up for Jim's blacksmith forge and all of his equipment there. And you see the forge is glowing because the building just is not doing a good job retaining heat. And so the forge is acting as our furnace on these cold days. So I'm looking forward to when the temperatures are above 30 again, and I don't have to see my breath in the studio. And Rick and Val, thought ahead, and they put in this beautiful gallery space. And everybody loves the floor, which is cemented in broken pieces of glass and projects that they had going on. There's some very interesting critters that I can tell are definitely Val's work. And again, the windows just really highlighting all of the glass so beautifully. So now we're on to shoes. So 2021 rolls, well, okay, so 2020 is when we purchased. Rick and Val stayed here for a month or so while their house was getting finished up in Hawaii. And then after they moved to Hawaii, I started coming to North Carolina for a couple of weeks at a time. And Jim was still working back in Nebraska. I'd go back to Nebraska. Our house was still not for sale at this point in time. We had talked about staying in Nebraska until the kids were finished with college, and as Jim put it, on her own 2 feet. We have one of those right now who's finished and very much on her own 2 feet, and the other one is finishing up this year I don't know if he'll be on his own 2 feet though. But anyway, so that was the plan, was that we would go back and forth. So I'd come here for a couple of weeks, go to Nebraska for a month, 6 weeks, and then come back. And again, wonderfully, Gary was taking care of things for us, making sure that nobody's broken into the house or anything that needs to be taken care of. So January 21 rolls around, and we're watching the inauguration, and President Biden's giving his speech, and in it he's talking about just the state of affairs, and he says, if we show a little tolerance and humility, if we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes, as my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes. And it just hit me. I need to make shoes. I don't know what it was at that moment, but I was just, boom, make shoes. Got to figure out how to make shoes. So I head off to the thrift shop, pick up a few shoes that look like, this might work. And, try to figure out, like, what do I need to do to the shoe in order to be able to make this happen? And so the first shoe that I successfully cast is this one. As you'll see in later pictures, I build up clay for when I pour the mold. And I thought, well, I'll just make an ankle, and I'll do it in blue so it'll look like a sock. Yeah, no, that it actually looked like somebody had severed the bone right off, which is why I ended up drilling the hole out of it, because it really looked like the core of a bone, and it just grossed me out too. But I was really, really amazed and stoked by how well this shoe turned out. In the meantime, Jim's come back with me on one trip to North Carolina. We're driving back, and I'm reading the news about how crazy house sales are. People are getting 100 offers, and they're selling in days and all of this. And I said, I think we should put the house up for sale. And so we did. And this shoe emerged about that same time, and was sitting out in the studio during open houses, which I would be curious to know what people thought when they came across, because the ankle was still there at that time. And the house sold fast. We fortunately were able to stay long enough to get things packed up, but you know how that goes. There's no work happening in the studio during that time, and everything's crated up, and then eventually we get it to North Carolina, and Jim's still working back in Nebraska. So I'm really not working much in the studio, because when I'm here, I'm cleaning the house up and taking care of the leaves. We live So we're in Western North Carolina. We are about a half an hour from the Tennessee border. We are not in the Pisgah National Forest, but we are definitely part of the Pisgah Forest. So, you know, we might get enough leaves to rake daily.
Mm.
So, you know, when I'm gone for 6 weeks, that daily pile is really, really thick. And then there's the mowing and everything else. So I really didn't get much time in the studio. But what I was doing that whole time was I was using that software tester, analytic brain, thinking, how am I going to make this project happen? So I think everybody on the call's probably heard the phrase, walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. So I'm like, well, 5,280. Yeah, that would take me like 4 years to make that many shoes, at least. I mean, I'm thinking that they're going to go fast. If, you know, I'm going to get a process down, and I'm like, but still 4 years is like so far away for me. So I'm like, well, what if each shoe represents 100 feet in that mile? And so that's where I came up with creating 52 shoes. So my first goal was to create 52 shoes. And I had set out to do it by the end of 2022, and then produce a book from there. And of course, you know, get the show on the road so that people can experience the shoes. And so I put out, you know, I sent an email out on my email new folks. I put things out on Facebook. I told everybody. And so people, you know, I'm looking for shoes, but more importantly, that shoe is pretty boring in and of itself. I want the stories. Tell me something about that shoe. What makes it important? And so, you know, this slowly are starting to trickle in, or people would ask me questions and say, oh, it doesn't have to be that your specific shoe. I mean, if it is, that's great. But, you know, go to a thrift store and find a shoe that looks like and reminds you of that story. And so I did get some of those too. So I also picked up some more shoes and started practicing making shoes. Now my early shoes, and you can't really tell from the photos because my photographer is very good at angles, but they don't have soles. And so the process is actually pretty quick if you don't have soles. But adding soles adds a lot of time. And this is the first shoe that I did after the first shoe. And as I was working on it and working through aging it and giving it meaning, I started recalling my experience. And Jim was with me for the American Craft Council show in 2019 in Baltimore. And we were walking, I think it was after the first day of setup, and a homeless gentleman had stopped me stopped us. And he commented, Jim had his ball cap on, and he asked what school it was for. And so we were talking with him for maybe 5 minutes or so. And finally he got around to asking for money, you know, so that he could get bus fare. And we didn't have any cash on us. We had been told, you know, you're going to Baltimore, don't do that. And so, you know, we said, oh, sorry, we don't have any cash. And we apologized. And he was just so gracious. And he didn't miss a beat in saying, that's okay. He said, you took the time to talk to me. Most people just walk on by. And that really hit me because, you know, everybody just wants to be seen. And so that's really what this one's about. I can't believe I'm actually crying over this. But you know, but Jim and I both put some money in our pockets for the next day in case we saw him, because we were just really impressed by him. And you know, he wished us well. He said, God bless you. And you know, but we never did see him, so we weren't able to give him money for fare the next day or anything like that. But this one is probably, yeah, wow. I didn't realize that this one had so much meaning for me. So I posted that shoe on Facebook, and wait, this is playing slower than I thought it would. And I had somebody who commented and reached out, and in the comment, she told me the story of her grandson who was diagnosed with leukemia at like age 3 and made it to his 17th birthday and graduation. And for graduation, he wore red high tops underneath his gown. And so I was inspired by her story and created this shoe. when I went back to find her story, I couldn't. And I asked other friends in Facebook groups. We could find my post, but we could not find her story. So I had no way of reaching out to her because I would have gladly sent her this shoe. This shoe, without knowing the story, is probably the one that actually attracts the most attention. Everybody goes to this shoe. And I think some of it is because of how fragile it is. This is the first time I've worked this tall. And so the ankle is actually very fragile, and missing some parts of glass in there and everything. But it really just, it draws everybody in. And when I was thinking about exhibiting, I also try to think about ways to help tell the story. So the graduation cap being in there for this one. I figured people send me flip-flops. I haven't gotten one yet, but I thought I should probably practice. And so I made a flip-flop, fun colors. And of course, you know how the bands are, they're very thin and fragile. And no matter how many times I tried, that band was not going to be all in one piece. And so it reminds me so much of flip-flops you would just find walking down the street or on the beach. You know, somebody left it behind because they can't walk in it anymore. The heel, I did know I was going to be getting heels because I have a friend whose shoe will show up later on. So I went and got practice heels. The fun part of this story is I'm at the thrift shop. I've got baby shoes, I've got slippers, I've got this heel in hand, pair of heels in hand. And I don't know, it's like 5 inches in the heel. And there's a older grandmotherly lady staring at my cart, and she looks at me and she looks at my cart. And I just knew what was going through her head. And I said, "Oh, the shoes are for an art project." And she says, "It's really pretty, dear." So I was like, yeah, I know what she's thinking. Big stiletto, hot pink.
Mhm.
Yep. And so this one I'm sharing a little bit of the process because it's kind of cool to see with the heels. So I build up clay walls to help keep my plaster in place as I pour the plaster over the shoes. I do consider this a lost shoe process. I do not use silicone or wax to create new models. So the shoes themselves are the models. And so in this case, I've built up the upper, and I've done the same for the bottom of the shoe. The first time through, I did not realize that there was no way that heel was coming out. So this was not the final mold as this broke trying to do it. So I ended up learning that it needed to be in 3 parts. So in this shoe, you're seeing at the front of it, the sole runs from the front of the heel up and over. That's all one piece. And then the heel, the round part of the heel on the back side. And then I put those together with the glass clay and then pack them back in to create that solid surface before they go back into the kiln. And then these are parts from the upper as they're getting put in place. And it's, you know, you just use what you need to. In order for me to get this piece to stay put standing and dry, I needed to use other, you know, the spoon, and I'm not even sure, it might be a piece of glass that's resting across the other piece there. And then once all these parts are put together, then it come back together to create that whole shoe. Baby shoes, mentioned that I had those. I knew I had baby shoes coming. And so I started making baby shoes at the same time the war in Ukraine broke out. So disrupted play. There's 2 of this one that do not have a sole. Later on, I did one that has a sole, but there's something in the images that came out of Ukraine during that time, and thinking about the children and the families and their lives being disrupted, and not having soles actually seems very meaningful to these shoes to me. The baby shoes I was expecting, Mother's Love, those were donated by Anita, and a beautiful story. And I thought also during Ukraine, I'm going to make yellow and blue shoes. What I did not realize is that the kiln was going to take over and do its thing. And what came out was not what I had expected, but more than I could have ever done in my mind, and absolutely perfect. These are torn apart. These almost new shoes, donated by my stepmom in honor of her sister who passed away before she was able to wear them. A little bit more process here. So shoes with soles. I make an imprint of the sole into a puddle of plaster. And then after that, afterwards, I remove it and I add holes into the soles. Soft shoes like these tennis shoes, I usually just do cut a slit down so I can get my hand in, because when I pour the mold over top, I pull the shoe out from the bottom. If the shoe has less give to it than a soft shoe like this, then I'll actually cut a bigger hole in so that I have more to work with, and it helps to push the sole together to remove from the plaster. Memories from long ago. This is a shoe that Yafa Todd, and Aaron, do you know Yafa and Jeff?
No.
Okay, I know Yafa, when I mentioned that I was doing this, Yafa mentioned that she remembered meeting Corey when he was maybe 3, so so she knows his folks. So yeah, she had donated this shoe and her husband's shoe. They are both glass blowers here in Western North Carolina. This particular shoe, and I really don't remember if the original did or not, but the sole of the glass shoe has a hole in it, which I think is so appropriate. Like Jeff put his stepped on hot glass and burned a hole in the bottom. It may have had a hole. I really don't remember. Garage shoes in the studio. Another glass artist here in town, JJ. Big Bend and Memories. My friend Kim, who is a glass artist in Texas, sent this pair of shoes. And for her, the pattern of the shoe was part of what was important to it. And then of course the memories that she had with the shoe. These are probably the most fabric texture that I had encountered at this point in time. And there, if you think back to the butterfly vessel that I had, there was no way for me to actually be able to paint details onto this texture. It just wouldn't hold. But I attempted it in the second shoe by lightening up the colors and going with a larger pattern. And again, I apologize. I think it's the Zoom is slowing the video down. I thought that it would be a little bit better, but let's see. And now this one's a fun one. So I mentioned Gary Beecham earlier. So Gary knew about the shoe project, and he was out at the recycling center, and he noticed a couple of pairs of shoes that were sitting out that were in pretty decent shape. A lot of folks here will leave the good stuff out for somebody to pick up if they so choose. So he brings over these pairs of shoes, and he says to me, here you go, and he's got this like grin on his face, like he's presenting me a challenge. So on the right hand corner here is the detail of that shoe, and let me see if I can back. Oh, that's not the way I was hoping to go. I was hoping to get more detail of the shoe. So the detail of the actual shoe is what was up in that top corner. There we go. Oh, pause. There we go. So this was the first time that I had worked beyond working with powders on the surface of the shoe. And so I was using larger pieces of glass to try to mimic that beadwork that was in there. Miles Beyond, this shoe was sent in by a woman who lost her sister to cancer, and then the shoes subsequently were part of her walk for the cure. So I added the pink ribbon on the embellishment there on the back sides. Now my screen doesn't want to move again. There we go. And here's a process picture. So when I mentioned painting it in, I am taking a paintbrush with some water and dipping that into glass powder. And then I get a bead of glass powder and I place it into the shoe where I need to. So this is how I fill all of my laces and do all of the detail work. And then if glass gets out of place, I just take take the brush cleaned with water and pick it back up and either take it out or move it to where it belongs. And here's the sole separate from the top, and you can kind of see the original in the background there. And so after I have both pieces out of the kilns, then I have to work on getting them to fit back together. So I go back and forth grinding, sometimes by hand, sometimes on a grinder, sometimes with a Dremel tool. This is the other half of from that other moccasin. And with this one, after doing that first one, I was like, I have a pair of shoes that were glitter, and I knew I wanted to achieve that look. And so this was a practice. How do I get that glitter effect? And here's the shoes that have the glitter effect. My ruby slippers were sent in by glass artist Shoshana Englard, who is no longer with us. They were her prized possession. I sat them on my shelf for a long time. I had not met Shoshana in person until I flew out for the GAS conference in 2022. And a couple of days later, her husband texted me that she had passed away from a massive heart attack. So hard shoes to work on. I did end up making a second pair and sent them to her family in her honor. This is the heel I knew was coming, pain in the toe. So I did have that practice. This one has the advantage, or the difference between this and the other heel, though, is that this one actually has an insole. And I think you might remember from when we met in the fall, I had shown you and Corey the pieces in process here. Mm-hmm. So you've got the sole, the insole, the heel parts, and then the upper. My cowboy boot, big challenge for me because of its height, which is not quite 11 inches, but about 12 to 13 once you get that, the mold on it. And so I was pushing the limits of my kiln, and I was concerned I was actually going to have to either fire it on its side or try to fire up one of Rick's kilns, and cross my fingers that I programmed it right for what I needed to have happen. Fortunately, it fit in my kiln, standing up, barely, but it did. And this is actually made, there's a sole, there's the shoe part of the upper, and then the calves were made in two separate parts so that I was able to actually get in there and do the decoration. And then all of those pieces are bonded back together with the glass clay. Words Hurt, another heel. This has a very poignant story about overcoming those stories that we are told in our youth and how they stick with us, and then overcoming that.
Hey, Dori, we reached our 2-hour mark.
Okay, all
so
righty.
If you want to just kind of breeze through the rest of these, we can always read the stories and learn more about them at the show. But I'm sure there's such a variety, and every piece has a great story. But I'm so grateful for you to show. These are great. Show these creative.
So this is this is the final. Yeah. When it goes in for its final firing. And my final thoughts, I have to include this because you guys don't know like how this ties back in. So I took clown classes when I was in college too. And that's me with my grandmother. And so I decided that I probably need to make a clown shoe for the trip. So here's the clay model of it. I found the story, Lolly the Clown out of Michigan, of all places, go figure. And Lolly's shoe is actually coming out of the kiln today. It's still too hot to take out, but this is what it looked like going in, so.
Very cool. Look forward to seeing it live in person.
Yeah.
That is great. Well, thank you, Dori, for sharing. This is really interesting. It's nice to see how your path came together and how where it's going to go. You know, your process is becoming better and better. And the time that you put into creating just cutting the sole open, just to think about the logistics of pulling the shoe apart and process is just really, really interesting. Dori will have a solo exhibition of about 50 shoes down at the Glass Art Fair. So make sure you have a chance to see it. You can have a talk with her if you have ideas for commission. The shoes are priced very, very reasonably, so contact me for a price list. We'll be primarily offering them down in Florida for the first time, so make sure you're there. If not, contact me. Thank you again, Dori, for joining us and sharing your narrative and stories.
I appreciate it so much.
If you have any questions for Dori and I, feel free to contact either one of us. We're looking forward to working with you guys more and seeing you down in Florida. Well, have a great weekend. We'll see you next week for the auction review, and have a, and stay warm, please, 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 all of you. All right, be well, everybody. Bye
Yep,
bye.
thank you.